Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the RotoBaller Radio Fantasy Football Waiver Wire Series. The Waiver Wire for Week 9 of your fantasy football season. Folks, don't forget to head over to RotoBaller.com right now. Sign up for whatever premium package it is you're looking for. Football the rest of the way, NBA, NHL, whatever sport you're interested in, RotoBaller.com has you covered. Use the promotional code ACES at checkout and save on those RotoBaller Premium Passes. Don't forget, like and subscribe right here to the RotoBallers YouTube channel, as well as download the RotoBaller app. It's free, 6 great sports right there on your phone, season long or DFS, whatever you're looking for, RotoBaller.com has you covered. All right, so Week 8 almost in the books. As always, full disclosure, it's an early look at the waiver wire, so we record this before the Sunday and Monday night games, so things can obviously change, additional injuries and effectiveness, surprise players. So I will post that in any of the comments once this is published on Tuesday. Yahoo roster percentages are talking point. Trying to keep it at or about 50%. There are a few players today I will mention slightly over that 50% mark as well. And heading into Week 9, Week 8, nice, no bye weeks, ton of injuries. We'll talk about it in a minute. And then Week 9, we have 4 teams on a bye. We have the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk, Kittle, to name a few. The Denver Broncos, Javonte Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Russell Wilson, who would have been potentially a waiver ad this week. Jacksonville Jaguars and their wide receiver, ATN's been great, Trevor Lawrence. And the Detroit Lion offense with Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs. David Montgomery's already been out with an injury, Sam Laporta. So we are missing players. And then as I fix my hat, Week 8 was devastating at the quarterback position, and that's the key here for this waiver wire series. Kirk Cousins' season over, Achilles injury. Kenny Pickett leaves the game with a rib injury. Matthew Stafford out, leaves the game with a thumb. Tyrod Taylor with a rib for the New York Giants. Desmond Ridder gets benched for Taylor Heineke. We still have other injuries too, right? Justin Fields is still at quarterback position. Has become a mess. Let's just acknowledge it. Injuries at wide receiver included Drake London with a groin, Kendrick Bourne with a knee, and Darren Waller left the game for the New York Giants at the tight end position. He was questionable coming in. He played. He didn't finish. That hamstring injury became too much for him to bear. So, that being said, let's talk quarterbacks here for a moment. And there's a ton of quarterbacks out there. I'm not going to break them down, but the next in line guys, if there's injury. Okay, and maybe it's a 2 QB league, right? Taylor Heineke, I think he should continue starting for the Atlanta Falcons. Minnesota, currently on their roster, Jaron Hall, a 5th-round pick, who went 3 for 4 for 23 yards after Kirk Cousins was out. Brett Rippon took over for the Los Angeles Rams after the Matthew Stafford injury. 5 of 10, 42 yards. Tyrod Taylor goes out. They don't even let the kid throw a pass. I mean, that was a debacle, that Giant game. Kenny Pickett, replaced by probably the most common name, Mitch Trubisky. He goes 15 of 27, 138 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, a typical Mitch Trubisky line. And then who knows what the Giants do next? Like Daniel Jones has been out with an injury. They were hoping Week 10. So who knows who plays quarterback? If they even, maybe they just run different running backs on the center. The Giants are a mess right now. That being said, those quarterbacks are out there. So if you don't get one of the top free agents, you can roll with the backup. Or if you're in a 2 QB league, those guys are out there. Now, that being said, my overall quarterback waiver wire to look at starts with Kyler Murray. Okay, now he's a little over that 50% plateau. He's 56% rostered on Yahoo. I added him just a week ago, where I have Jalen Hurts, preparing for Jalen Hurts' bye week. I grabbed Kyler Murray knowing I would only need him for that 1 week. Kyler Murray, it wasn't too long ago, was a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. The knee is healthy. They're taking their time bringing him back. There are a few pieces there in Arizona that can be effective. Trey McBride, big game. We'll talk about him when we get to the tight ends. Hollywood Brown, Michael Wilson. There are pieces there for Kyler Murray. The Arizona invested the big contract. Whether he's there next year is a different conversation. But Kyler Murray at 56% rostered. If he is available, he could save you potentially if you've lost a Kirk Cousins or so. Number 2 at the quarterback position, I've mentioned him before, Sam Howell of the Washington Commanders. Continues to put up numbers. He's a gunslinger, and I love watching him play in actuality. May get to all of his wide receivers involved. They utilize the run game. Sam Howell against the Philadelphia Eagles in a 6-point per touchdown format put up just under 44 fantasy points. 39 completions, 397 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Goes on the road against New England. The number 3 quarterback I wanted to mention, time to bring up the rookie. If Tennessee brings Ryan Tannehill back in any way, shape, or form, they are out of their mind in Tennessee. It's Will Levis's job. Let's see what he's got the rest of the year, because he looked darn good in his first start. 19 of 29, 238 yards, 4 touchdowns, 34.6 fantasy points in a 6-point per touchdown format. Goes up against Pittsburgh next week. I love that matchup. He's 3% rostered. Baker Mayfield is available. He's only rostered in 30% of Yahoo leagues. 237 yards, 2 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield has 4 games of 20 or more fantasy points in a 6-point per touchdown format. Good matchup on the road next week against the Houston Texans. Baker Mayfield has 10 touchdown passes to only 4 interceptions this season. And finally, Derek Carr, 36% rostered. His 3rd straight game of over 300 passing yards, 310 to be exact, 2 touchdowns, 22.3 fantasy points. He goes against the Chicago Bears. So those are my 5 quarterbacks that I'd really try to get. Kyler, Sam Howell, Will Levis, Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr. Then it's all those other backups that I mentioned. The Heinekes, the Halls, the Rippons, the Trubiskys, depending upon how long any of these other quarterbacks are out. You may have to wait. You might not even need to use a waiver claim. You could come to first-come free agency and see what the status is for guys like Matthew Stafford, Kenny Pickett, Tyrod Taylor, etc. All right, a couple of running backs to mention real quick to you here. Amari DiMercato of the Arizona Cardinals is my top running back to add on the week. 20 of 78 in the game for Arizona against in their loss to the Baltimore Ravens. He also had 1 reception for a yard, 8.9 fantasy points. Tough matchup against the Cleveland Browns next week. However, any running back who gets 20 carries needs to be paid attention to, and he is only rostered in 36% of Yahoo leagues. Second running back I wanted to mention is Cam Akers of the Minnesota Vikings. He's over that 50%, so he might not be available. I get it. 57% of leagues he's currently rostered. Makes him available in 43%. He was a sleeper play of mine this week. Did get in the end zone, finished with 9.5 fantasy points. Alexander Mattison had more carries, but truthfully wasn't overly effective. Cam Akers, 9 for 19, and that touchdown. Goes against Atlanta next week, and who knows what that Minnesota offense is going to look like in a week. Will they lean heavily on a 2-headed running attack, depending upon who now takes over for Kirk Cousins at quarterback? Also, real quick mention, the Rams running back room. Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman again shared the load this week for the Rams in their loss to the Dallas Cowboys. Henderson is still only 45% rostered. Royce Freeman sits at 22% rostered. Both of them had over 10 PPR fantasy points in Week 8. Darrell Henderson finishing with 11.5, mostly through 3 catches for 54 yards. And Freeman goes 9 for 44 and gets in the end zone, finishing with 10.4 fantasy points. Good matchup for the Rams' run game against the Green Bay Packers next week. Now, as far as wide receiver goes, just a couple of names to mention. Jahan Dotson coming off a big game, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 108 yards, and a touchdown against Philadelphia. Again, tied to Sam Howell, and I'm okay with that. He's 51% rostered, so he's right at the brink. Okay, against New England next week on the road in New England, Jahan Dotson has 18 targets in his last 2 games, averaging 9 targets per game. Rashid Shaheed of the New Orleans Saints reminds me of Deshaun Jackson. Okay, a lot of big play. Maybe you don't like him as much in a PPR format, but in a standard format, he has the ability to make big plays, as evidenced by that 3 catches for 153 yards, 51 yards per catch for Shaheed this week, including a touchdown, 24.3 fantasy points in that PPR format. Terrific in like a best ball. Obviously, you can't add him in a format like that. But in a standard format where you're not worried about him getting 7 or 8 targets, because that's not going to happen, or 7, 8 receptions, when he does make a catch, it is a big play usually, and he goes against the Chicago Bears secondary in Week 9. And finally, from the Buffalo Bills, they have number 3 receiver. We wondered who would take, some targets with Dawson Knox out. Well, we saw Dalton Kincaid have a nice game on Thursday night, but so did Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills, the Bills' third wide receiver. Targeted 6 times, turns those 6 targets into 6 receptions, 92 yards, 15.2 fantasy points. Against Cincinnati next week. Cincinnati's defense is tough. Just finished watching them hold San Francisco back. Okay, over his last 2 games, Shakir has 10 targets, caught all of them, 10 receptions for 127 yards. And finally, if you need a tight end, it's a nice week to check out the tight end waiver wire. 3 names to mention. First, Taysom Hill of the New Orleans Saints. 3 straight games of over 12 fantasy points. 3 weeks ago it was 12.26. Last week it was 16.8. And then in week 8, 22.46. Now he's a tight end, but he gets most of his points running the ball. 9 carries, 63 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns this week for Taysom Hill. Had 1 catch for 14 yards. He's only 35% rostered on Yahoo. Goes against the Bears in week 9. Number 2, Trey McBride takes off for Zach Ertz, who hits the injured reserve list. And Trey McBride becomes a Josh Dobbs favorite in Arizona this week. Only 19% rostered. Targeted 14 times. Very difficult to ignore that number. He should be added almost everywhere. 10 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown. 25.5 fantasy points on the road against the Cleveland Browns next week. And then number 3, one of my old favorites, Logan Thomas of the Washington Commanders. I have him in spots where I had Waller. He'll play next week for me for Waller. I won't even dive onto the waiver wire for a tight end. I'll just put Logan Thomas in my lineups. He's got 26 targets in his last 4 games. He's 45% rostered on Yahoo. 6 catches, 44 yards, and a touchdown this week on those 8 targets. 16.4 fantasy points. And it goes against the New England Patriots next week. Now, to summarize, my top 5 ads of the week, and it really all depends on what you need, but it's a heavy quarterback top 5. Number 5, Sam Howell, quarterback, Washington Commanders. Number 4, if you need a wide receiver, Jahan Dotson of the Washington Commanders. Number 3, Taysom Hill, tight end, New Orleans Saints. Number 2, DeMarcado, the running back from Arizona. And the number 1 ad of the week, if he's available, Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. That being said, if you've been devastated by the quarterback room or the quarterback injuries and those bye weeks, my top 5 ads at the quarterback position for week 9 of the fantasy football season. At number 5 was Derek Carr. Number 4, Baker Mayfield. Number 3, Will Levis. Number 2, Sam Howell. And number 1, Kyler Murray. Those are my top 5 quarterback ads for week 9 after being devastated by injury at the position this week. All right, everybody, give me a follow on Twitter at @AnianoFantasy, and we'll see you next time right here on RotoBaller Radio.